It's early. Um, we're gonna start in about 5 minutes. So get ready. Maybe a little bit of context for those who may not know. The poem uh, Banat Suad was written by Ka'ab ibn Zuhair, and in this time of the Prophet, poems were used as like social media to uh, spread messages, to send news, to promote certain agenda or objectives. And Ka'ab ibn Zubayr is like during his time is the greatest, is a great poet, son of a great poet, and they used to sort of battle rap, right, between each other to see who's best, the best poet of the land, and to speak of whatever that was going on at the time. And of course, during that time, the Prophet was there spreading his messages. It was growing, and his message was growing. And during this time, the Prophet had already migrated to Medina, and the companions of the Prophet had heard of Ka'ab ibn Zubair and his growing influence, of his poetry against the Prophet, and there was a bounty on his head, um, and because of that, um, at this time, Ka'ab has already turned and saw that the message being sent by the Prophet was true. So he wanted to go to Medina to present himself to the Prophet, but he couldn't go straight away because there was, like I said, there was a bounty on his head. So he went in disguise. And okay, I think I'll let CD continue the story. Fadal, we can begin. Bismillah.
تنفي الرياح القذى عنه وأفرطه من صوب سارية بيض يعليل أكرم بها خلة لو أنها صدقت موعودها أو لو أن النصح مقبول لكنها خلة قد سيط من دمها فعج وولع وإخلاف وتبديل فما تدوم على حال تكون بها كما تلونوا في أثوابها الغول ولا تمسكوا بالعهد الذي زعمت كما يمسك الماء الغرابيل بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So those were the opening part of Banat Su'ad, which is a poem written by Ka'b ibn Zuhair. Um, Perhaps I'll just give an overview about what we're trying to cover today. There will be a few parts, but I do like to say that because the concepts in the poem and uh, early Islamic slash Jahili poetry is and it's not a common topic that's spoken about in classes. I do recommend you ask as many questions as you like, only because I hope it'll make me start thinking about new concepts, and we can try make this a more interactive session together. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So that's Banat Su'ad. The next slide. Okay, so 3 questions. We'll try to cover what happened, the anecdote behind Ka'b ibn Zuhair, and how he came to write the poem Banat Su'ad. It's quite a involved story of him and also his brother Bujair ibn Zuhair. And I'll speak about the Zuhair family, which is the family of poets from early Arabia. And then we'll try cover why does this poem look this way. So the poem is organized or revolves around 3 sections: the Nasib, the Rahil, and the Fakhr, or the Madh. So it's a tripartite structure, some people call it. It covers 3 sections. And early Islamic poetries, or early Arabic poetries, all tend to follow the same structure, this tripartite structure, which is the Nasib, which is the love sickness, where the poet talks about his beloved. And then the Rahil, which is where he talks about animals, or the animal that will, for example, the she-camel that will eventually bring him to his beloved. And then the Fakhr, which is the boast, where he either boasts about his clan, or boasts about his tribe, or boasts, but in this instance, Ka'b instance, he does what we call madh, which is praise, or madih, where he does praise of the Prophet ﷺ. And eventually, what did the poem become? Because it inherits a tradition, and it also gives birth to a whole new tradition for Arabic poetry. Okay, we can go next slide, I think. So the story. Some of you might have attended the other day on Monday Recharge, but I'll try and cover in a similar fashion the anecdote of Ka'b ibn Zuhair. So Ka'b ibn Zuhair was the son of Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma. So Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma was what a certain scholar called one of the immortals of pre-Islamic age. So Zuhair ibn Sulma was one of the poets that composed the Mu'allaqat. So the Mu'allaqat are what we call the hanging odes. So the hanging ode, so in pre-Islamic Arabia, you have these poets who would compose poetry, and because they were just so great, they would hang them on the Kaaba. So you had around 10, some people say 7, some people say different numbers, but you had these 10 great odes written by, for example, Imrul Qais, Antara ibn Shaddad, and then you have Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma. So Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma had his own mu'allaqat, which was hung on the Kaaba. And he had 2 sons, Ka'b and Bujair. So Ka'b and Bujair were both poets in their own right. And Ka'b in turn also had 2 sons named Uqba wal Awam. So Uqba and Awam. So he comes and inherits this. He comes from this great family of poets. And being in a household such as this, you inherit so many of the skills that your father has and so many skills that your brother has. So this is the environment that he came from. And for example, I included here, which I didn't mention on Monday, but Umar al-Khattab actually, it's attributed to him that he spoke about Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, and he says that he only used to praise people who deserved that praise. So he wrote poems where he would praise the kings of Arabia or praise his tribe, but he will only praise them if they deserve that praise. And he was known to spend an entire year writing. He would spend a long number of months writing a poem or composing a poem. Then he would spend an entire year just polishing up that poem. So you can understand that artistry takes a long time. Anyway, I think we can go to the next slide. So when the Prophet ﷺ, we're just gonna fast forward. So when the Prophet ﷺ gave the early message to Meccans, Ka'b, coming from a family of poets, would do what we call satire or invective. In Arabic, it's called hija, where he would invect the Prophet ﷺ and make fun of him and make fun of the Muslims. And Bujair will also do something similar as well. So Ka'b ibn Zuhair was known to be among the poets that used to make fun of the Prophet ﷺ, would also do what we call, like I mentioned earlier, invective. Now, when Fath al-Makkah happened in the 8th year of Hijrah, which is around 630 CE, all the Meccan disbelievers start running out of Mecca. Ka'b and Bujair and his brother Bujair were one of them, or two of them, and they run to this place that was then called Abrak al-Azaf. So it was somewhere near Medina, or somewhere out in the outskirts of Mecca, and they stay there. They run away from the Muslims, and they try and seek refuge. And when Ka'b and Bujair go to this place, Abrak al-Azaf, Bujair tells his brother, okay, why not you stay here until I go and check the Prophet ﷺ out and see what he has and what he's trying to talk about, and see if it's, if it's any good. So they both go. So Bujair goes, and Ka'b stays back. And Bujair eventually ends up becoming Muslim. So Ka'b learns of this, of Bujair's conversion, and he writes a few lines of poetry, and he sends them, he conveys them to Bujair through intermediaries. So people would travel from different places in Arabia. So if he knew someone was going to Medina, he would say, okay, convey these lines of poetry to my brother Bujair. So he said, ألا بلغ عني بجيرا رسالة فهلك في التي تلوم عليها باطل سقاق بها المأمون كأسا روية فأنهلك منها المأمون وعلك. So he says, would anybody tell Bujair that what he's reciting, is this really what he wants to do? He's asking his brother Bujair. And he says, the praiseworthy one, he calls him Ma'moon, which means Al-Amin. The Prophet ﷺ was known as Al-Amin wal-Ma'moon. So he was the praiseworthy one, the person that people would believe in. He said, the praiseworthy one has given you a nourishing cup, and has given it to you once and given it to you twice. Because the Arabs used to differentiate between the first drink you'll take and the second drink you'll take. So they would sorry, I lost my line trap. So he says, سَقَاقَ بِهَا الْمَأْمُونُ كَأْسًا رَوِيَةً. So the praiseworthy one would give you a nourishing cup. And he says, and Bujair learns of this. So Bujair tells the Prophet ﷺ that Ka'b has written these odes, and he said that he satires him, saying that he calls you the praiseworthy, albeit, but he says he's given us nourishing drink. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Ma'munun wallah. He said, yes, the praiseworthy one, referring to himself, that even though Ka'b didn't believe in the Prophet ﷺ, he still called him praiseworthy one. So you can see that the Prophet ﷺ was known in Mecca as people, as someone that people would believe in, someone would put their trust in. So Bujair tells the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Man laqiya Ka'ban falyaqtulu. So whoever sees Ka'b, let that person kill him. So he's put a bounty on his head because of all the invective and all the satire that Ka'b has written about the Prophet ﷺ. He says, whoever sees him, then let him kill him. So, and Bujair conveys his lines of poetry back to Ka'b. So he says, Man mubligan Ka'ban fahallaka fillati talumu alayha batilan wahya ahzamu. So he says, will anybody tell Ka'b? Because now when we spoke about Ka'b said, will anybody tell Bujair? Now Bujair is saying, will anybody tell Ka'b that whatever that he's claiming to be false is actually what's actually true. So Bujair is giving him his own lines of poetry, sending them back to Ka'b. And he says at the end, فَدِينُ كَعْبٍ وَلَا شَيْءَ دِينُهُ فَدِينُ أَبِي سُلْمَ عَلَيَّ مُحَرَّمُ. So he says that the deen of Ka'b, it's nothing, it means nothing. And also the deen of Abi Sulma, which is their father, also is prohibited upon himself. And so Ka'b learns of this, and he tries to run to his tribe Muzayna, and Muzayna says that they won't give him protection anymore. And so he really has nowhere to go. And eventually he accepts that he has nowhere to go but Medina. So he goes to Medina around Fajr time. And also, some say his disguise, some say that because the Prophet ﷺ didn't know how he looked like, he felt safe that he could do it, that he could go there. And he goes in Fajr time to the Prophet ﷺ's mosque. And some people say it was Ali bin Abi Talib that brought him in from the outskirts of Medina to the Prophet ﷺ. Some say it was a man from the Juhayna tribe. So he ends up going to the Prophet ﷺ after Fajr, and he approaches him and he puts his two hands on the Prophet ﷺ's hands and said, جاءك كعب بن أبي زهير تائبا مسلما فلأنت قابلا منه إن أنا جئتك به. So he says, Ka'b is speaking to the Prophet ﷺ. Ka'b ibn Zuhair is talking in third person, comes and wanting to accept Islam and making repentance. Will you accept him if I come and bring him myself? But this is Ka'b speaking in the third person. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Naam. He said, yes, I will accept him. And there's no doubt that Habib Umar has a small anecdote on the conversion of Ka'b, and it says because وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيُهَا, that the Prophet ﷺ, doesn't speak out of desire, and he only receives revelation, and he speaks in accordance with revelation. So he has no reason, and he has no desire to reject Ka'b even after all that he's done, and forgive him. So Ka'b says, أَنَا كَعْبْ ibn Abi Zuhair, أَنَا كَعْبْ ibn Zuhair. He says, I'm Ka'b ibn Zuhair. So you can understand that the Prophet ﷺ is surrounded by his companions, and he says, someone from the Ansar says, Ya Rasulullah, da'ni wa adu wallahi adrub unuqa. So he says, O Prophet of God, ﷺ, leave this enemy of God and let me strike off his neck. And the Prophet ﷺ said, da'hu ank. He said, no, leave him. فَإِنَّهُ جَاءَنَا تَائِبًا نَازِعًا. He says, leave him. Basically, don't strike off his neck. He's coming to us, making repentance and also leaving off all the disbelief that he's held on to before. So Ka'b ibn Zuhair then stands up and recites the poem بانت سعاد بانت سعاد فقلب اليوم متبول. And the Prophet ﷺ is amazed by this poem. And it comes in different renditions, so you would see different variations in terms of certain words and certain letters, only because it comes from an oral society. And it's a long poem, and we'll talk about the three parts or the tripartite structure. But when Ka'b gets to the part where he says, Inna ar-rasula la sayfun yustada'u bihi muhannadun min suyufillahi maslulu. The well-known report in tradition says that the Prophet ﷺ throws his cloak over him, his burda, which is why the poem is known as the first burda, or yastahiqu an yusamma bi burda. They say, the commentators say that it's deservingly being called the burda, and what we associate the burda to the burda of Imam al-Busiri, it's rather known as the bur'a, because Imam al-Busiri, who writes in the 13th century, was paralyzed from his waist down. In Arabic it's called fahil, I believe. And after composing the poem, he ends up getting cured in a dream. And the verse I recited earlier, إِنَّ الرَّسُولَ لَسَيْفٌ يُسْتَضَاءُ بِهِ يُسْتَضَاءُ مُحَنَّدٌ مِّن سُيُوفِ اللَّهِ مَسْلُولُ, is verily the Prophet is a sword which is illumined, an Indian blade from the unsheathed swords of God. And I'll go into why he likens the Prophet ﷺ to a sword. We can go to the next slide, I think. So that's the introduction to the poem Banat Su'ad. If you have any questions, just feel free to kind of shoot them, and I'll try and answer them in relation to the story. Yeah. He confessed, yeah. So when he said Ka'b is here and he's wanting to accept Islam, um, after he said, well, when Ka'b says, well, this is third person, the Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't know that's Ka'b just yet. And he says, if I bring Ka'b, will you accept him? And the Prophet ﷺ says, yes, na'am. And that's when he says, okay, I'm Ka'b ibn Zuhair. And just a side note, I forgot to mention, pre-Islamic society and early Islamic society, and we can just say Arab culture in general, is very much tied to the family. So when one accepts Islam in that time, it's pretty much equivalent to leaving one's tribe. So when Bujair says that the deen of Ka'b and the deen of Abi Sulma means nothing, it's basically saying that I've accepted I've made allegiance to a new tribe, and I've left basically the family of Abi Sulma. Which is why it enrages so many people. So you can see in a lot of pre-Islamic poetry, you would have lines written just because, someone killed a camel from another tribe, and then that will just start like a 30, 40-year war, which is, a different dynamic from what we kind of associate with right now. So I'll pass this out before we go to the tripartite structure of the qasida. We can just maybe hand it out. It's kind of something simple just to kind of drive the point home about the qasida. So the qasida is an Arabic ode or an Arabic poem, and we can probably go to the next slide, I think. Okay, what's the slide after this? Oh, the one before, sorry? Yes, okay, we'll go to this one. So the qasida in general has 3 parts. We'll start from the left. So the first is what we call the nasib, the loss, or some people call love sickness. And then you have the rahil, which is the journey. Why the journey? It depends on the loss, and I'll explain that in a bit. And then you have the fakhr, which is the boast, or in our poem it's called the madih, which is the praise. The nasib is very much understood as when the Arabs wanted to write a poem, they'll talk about their beloved being lost, basically, or their habib or their mahbub. And that's just how the Arabs started things. So they will talk about, my beloved, left me and she's gone and I haven't seen her, and she's gone to this far, far, far off place. And in order to get to that far off place, we're going to have to do the rahil, which is the journey. And how do we do that journey? It's a camel. And he's going to explain what the camel is and what type of camel would bring me to that destination. And then once he's done with these 2 parts, he arrives at what he really wants to get at, which is either he wants to boast about his tribe, or either he wants to do praise of someone, like here Ka'b this of the Prophet ﷺ. But you have so many, different types. You'll find so many things and so many themes. So roughly, the qasida follows these 3 parts, the tripartite structure. Except for example, you have Shanfara. It's called Lamiyat al-Arab, where he says, أقيموا بني أمي صدور متيكم فإني إلى أهل سواكم لأميل. So this poem, it's about him figuring out. It was a quarrel that he had with another tribe, but this poem in particular doesn't really follow that structure. So you can imagine when the Quran came down and the Arabs were already accustomed to this tripartite structure, it really kind of blows everything out the water, because then it doesn't follow these rules or these these well-known structures. So we can go to the next slide. So this is very simple. It's in the handout. It's really just different examples of pre-Islamic poetry explaining these 3 parts. So you have the loss. So Zuhair bin Abi Sulma, which is Ka'b's father, also has a poem where he starts with Awfa and talks about the traces, and she's left this place and she's no longer there. And then you have the Rahil. So you can see, for example, Tafra ibn Abd talks about the she-camel. Also Nabigha talks about the saddle and the donkey. And then you have Fakhr, which is Madih. But I wouldn't worry too much. I just really wanted to include this just so you can get an idea of what exists in pre-Islamic poetry. So it's taking me time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So how do we understand these these parts, right? The tripartite structure. It's similar to the khutbah, you know, in khutbah in Salatul Jum'ah. You know, it follows a certain structure. You know, it starts with the khatib doing Bismillah, Salawat, and then, you know, asking the Jama'ah to have taqwa of Allah. So it follows a similar structure, and that's how the Arabs, you know, that's just how it was. It was a convention that was held on to by the Arabs. In our times, in the more modern time, we can probably understand it as like a modern essay, how we learn in school. You have an introduction, and then you have, you know, you put your argument, you put a thesis argument, then you list out all your proofs, and, you know, you write the essay, and then once you write the essay, you give a conclusion. We don't really question, you know, why is it an essay like that? You know, in certain places you can be flexible, you can try and move things around, but in general, that's how an essay or how a book really is really composed. So that's just how the qasida was in that time. So you'd have the nasib, and then you have the rahil, and you have the fakhr, right? The live sickness, the camel, or the journey, and then you have the boast. So some of you might know Arabic poetry, classical Arabic poetry, is written in meter. So you have basit. It's called the bahr, right? They call it same word as ocean. So it's different meters. So Ka'b ibn Zuhair's Banat Su'ad was written on the basit meter, which is mustaf'ilun fa'ilun mustaf'ilun fa'ilun, which is it's kind of like I forget the word in English, but it's a meter where in one stanza of poetry you would have a limited number of syllables so that they all kind of sound the same. It gives a good beat to it. And then you have the rhyme. So the rhyme, this poem is called a lamiyya because it all ends with lam. The whole poem ends with lam. Every line ends with lam, right? Every bait, which is every verse, ends with lam. So you can see all these are just 8 examples of you know, the words that end with lam, right? And interesting enough, they all end in this form or in this word. Arabic call it wazn. So they're all on this mahmul, majhul, makbul, matbul. They all kind of sound the same. It's just that their root letters are different. So that's how he makes the poem rhyme. So yes, I think before we start section 1, I just want to open up to questions if there's anything you would like to clarify. If not, then we'll kind of carry on. Because we are on 11 minutes right now at the moment. 11 a.m. So before we go into the actual poem, it's helpful to understand how, you know, pre-modern Arabs understood social relations. You know, talking about, you know, the lost beloved might seem a bit hard for us to understand in a modern context, just because we're always so connected through our phones and online, and even if you don't see someone for 10 years, you might be able to call them on FaceTime or something like that. But for the Arabs, and they were Bedouins, you know, they will alight upon a place and they might see someone, and then the next thing you know it, her caravan is gone and she won't be there anymore. So the pain is very much real. And Bedouins were very much in touch with nature, so they talk about all sorts of different things. So talking about the camel, I mean, this was one of basically God's greatest creatures that He's created, because it can withstand so much endurance. It can go to far places without, you know, feeling tired. You know, it basically leads the entire caravan. So for the Arabs, I mean, the camel was such a great creature, and they liken things to the camel, and they draw so many similes with the camel. So the pain is very much felt when someone talks about the love sickness of a beloved, and which is why they say, we'll talk about it later, whether Su'ad is a real person or not, which is the protagonist of Banat Su'ad, is really because it draws the attention of people in that time. It draws the attention of the people who are hearing this poem. So we'll go straight into the poem, and then I think after we do part 1, we'll try and take a 5-minute break maybe, or 10-minute break, and then we'll continue with parts 2 and 3, and hopefully we'll end there. So بانت سعاد فقلب اليوم متبول متيم إثرها لم يفتم مقبول. So he starts this poem with Su'ad, which is the name of a woman. Su'ad is left, right? My heart today is lovesick. It's enthralled in her wake, unransomed in chains. So one can one can try and understand that these words also refer to himself, because he's also in this sense now, the bounty is on his head, he really has nowhere to go. But we can kind of push that aside and try and deal with the verse on its own and what it's trying to talk about. So Banat Su'ad, Su'ad is left, right? When one hears this, I mean, even when I read the poem for the first time and learned it, it really caught my attention, because you're here, Ka'b is here, standing in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and you know people around him are about to strike his head off, and he starts with Su'ad has left me, right? One starts to ask, who is Su'ad? Why has he left Ka'b, right? Why is he even talking about Su'ad in the first place? So it draws attention of its audience. So you know we can try and draw similarities with, you know, when someone starts a story, you would say once upon a time, right? And then once upon a time, you know, it'll kind of draw your ears in, and you'll be, okay, what happened, right? What's the story? What's the anecdote? So starting the poem with a nasib, with the love sickness, is really, you know, trying to draw the attention of its audience. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this is very involved, right? He goes straight in and starts describing how Su'ad is. And I mean, it's in the handout as well. You know, it's what we would call like a dissembling simile. So it starts with Su'ad, and he talks about her teeth, and then he talks about how her teeth look, and you know, the teeth is her tooth is kind of mixed with a small drop of what he calls birrah, which is wine, and then it's mixed with this clear water that comes from this mountain, and this mountain is, you know, water is only taken from a certain time, and it's blown by the wind. So it is a very involved, you know, I don't want to put so much at one time, but I really want to show you that how involved Arabic poetry is, and especially early Islamic poetry. Because I think we have a lot of conceptions of what Arabic poetry is, but even when I started learning it, I underestimated of how involved it actually was. So it's you can think of it as like a chain of similes. So you would describe something and describe that with something else and describe that with something else. So you know it really forms a chain. So I think we can go to the next slide. Also here, it's extended simile. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So at the end he says أرجو وآمل أن تدنو مودتها فما يقال لدينا منك تنويل. So he says that, you know, I hope that she'll come, that I'll meet her again. Then he says, but you know, hoping her is something that I'll never achieve. And the word here is tanwil. So I would kind of, if you have the handout, I would, you know, put a circle around tanwil, just because he uses that word later on in relation to the Prophet ﷺ, and his praise later on. You can go to the next slide, I think. So was Sa'ad a real person? That's one of the questions that I would say probably a modern reader in our time would probably be more concerned with. But the commentaries are quite, you know, they don't give a set answer of whether Su'ad was a real person or not. So for example, Imam Bajuri in his commentary says, some say, you know, he just made up that name just so he could express the feelings that he had. Some say it was his wife, and his wife left him, so he talks about his wife. But I actually think the best explanation to this would be, this is Ibn Qutayba, so he has a quote, or he has a line of poetry with وَمَا كَانَ طِبِّ حُبَّهَا غَيْرَ أَنَّهُ يُقَامُ بِالسَّلْمَى لِلْقَوَافِ صُدُورُهَا. So he says, you know, for poets, Salma is another person that he, you know, you would, it's a name that recurs in Arabic poetry of one's beloved. And it says it's not really about Salma that I'm interested about. I'm not really in love with her. But it's really, through her name or through the idea of her that I'm able to write poetry. The Greeks have something similar called like, the muse, right? So, she's my muse that you're through her you're able to write poetry. So for Arabs it's something similar, right? Because we can go to the next slide, I think. Because how the commentators justify is because he read it in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and had there been anything which was um, explicit or less than honorable, the Prophet ﷺ would have said something which, in the narrations that we had, he put his burda around over him instead. And this is a great book on the history of Arabic literature, Mustafa Sadiq al-Rafi'i. So he has a very, very small section on the love sickness of poetry, and this is the reasoning that he gives. Okay, maybe questions before we get into the she camel. Or if there isn't, it's fine. We can go on. Yeah, we'll do the she camel and then we'll take a 5-minute break because the mud, which is the praise, is more involved. So Ka'b says later on in the poem that أمست سعاد بأرض لا يبلغها إلا العتاق النجيبات المراسيل ولن يبلغها إلا عذافرة فيها على العين إرقال وتبغيل. So he says that Su'ad has gone to this far, 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 far off place, and the only animal that can bring me there is this great, great she camel. And then it's around 21 verses where he explains what kind of she camel this is, right? So one of it is its hide is like sea turtle shell, right? It sounds very random. Why does the camel have sea turtle shell? But it's a metaphor, a simile that's how he wants to describe the camel. Because sea turtle shell, it's very hard, sturdy. Anything you throw at it, it won't get hurt, right? And he says, وَجِلْدُهَا مِنْ أَطُومٍ لَا يُؤَيِّسُهُ تِلْحٌ بِضَاحِةِ الْمَتْنَيْنِ مَهْزُولُ. So even the starving tick, which is like a small little bug, even if you kind of think of it as like a mosquito on our bodies, right? Even if that mosquito is so hungry for blood, one person is so hard that even the mosquito wouldn't want to bite it. So that's how he understands the tick, and how he describes the skin of the turtle or skin of the camel. So it talks about its head having a slab of hewn stone, right? And it talks about its nobility because the pedigree of very much camels. If it came from a great camel, it will also be a great camel in turn. Okay, you can go to the next slide, I think. So maybe just one caveat before I continue with the description of the camel. The Arabs, if they want to say I'm sorry, like Ka'b ibn Zuhair, he wants to say basically compress it. He wants to say, the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, I'm sorry for everything I've done, and I want to be a better person. The Arabs are not going to say that. The Arabs are not going to say I'm sorry. For them, there's no creativity, right? It's too straightforward. It's not, you think about it, it's not artistic, right? Obviously, Arabic has a component where if it's concise, it's eloquent, but there's also itnab, which we call in Arabic. If it's very verbose, that's what we'll call eloquence as well. So, the way he's saying sorry is that he's giving a 58 poem, a 58 verse masterpiece, which is how he's basically saying I'm sorry. So you can understand why it's just so verbose and extended. So this is the starting part, or the first verse of the she camel, or the journey, right? أمست سعاد بأرض لا يبلغها إلا العتاق النجيبات المراسيل. And then he goes to explain how this camel looks like, and how this camel, the only camel that can bring him to Sa'ad in this far off place is this camel, right? And I think it's in the handout as well, so you can take a look at it. But it's It's never tired. You know, its sweat streaming behind the ears means that she can go on a journey for so long and that wouldn't tire her. Her eyes are white, just like a lone oryx. You know, her frame is like a stallion, like a great horse. Yeah, like I said earlier, her skin is like sea turtle. She comes from this great line of other camels, great pedigree and ability. Um, her ribs are very close to each other, which means she can go for far, or she has this endurance where the she camel can go for far places, um, and so on and so forth. So, you know, why I mentioned earlier about the unfolding simile is because it unfolds from one thing to another, and it just becomes this long chain where, for non-native Arab speakers, it becomes very involved, and it becomes at times, very confusing. Because then what's the point of all this, right? Can go to the next slide, I think. Yeah, so I mean, it's very involved. We don't have to worry about going through each one, but I'll just show it to you here, right? So this is the start of the line, and he says, as if the swing of her forelegs, right? As if the swing of her forelegs, and he's describing the forelegs of the camel. And then you can see, okay, I put an M dash there. As if the swing of her forelegs. It's like saying, as if my cat, and then you go on and describe, well, today I had a flat white for breakfast, and then I had potato bread and I want to have nasi lemak for lunch, and then later on I'm going to meet someone at a cafe, and then blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So you have this whole like parenthetical clause, basically, describing when the she camel is riding, right? So you're not going to find the answer in 3 or 4 lines. You're going to find it, you know, after this verse. You can go to the next one. Then it goes, like the 2 arms of a tall woman in middle age, bereaved, she rose, and so on and so forth. So you have, you know, the clause which is like in the start of a paragraph, and then, like I said, right, my cat is like, and then you give a whole different caveat, or you divert from the thing at hand, and you say, you do the tashbih later on. So yeah, maybe you can go to the next slide. So I think we can take a quick 5 minute, if you want to stretch or anything like that, 5-10 minute break. Okay? 5 minute? Less? 3 minute break? Maybe you want to use the bathroom or stretch, anything like that. You can also perhaps ask questions if you like. Yes. Yeah. Oh, it's just polytheist, I think. Polytheist, so he didn't have, I mean, he was, I mean, you pagan, yeah, so you worship idols, or just like the other early Meccans. Um, yeah. Some say 57 also. Yeah. There's a line 3 which is هيفاء مقبلة عجزاء مدبرة. Some say it's not part of the poem. Yeah. Not necessarily, not necessarily. So, for example, Busiri's, obviously this is later on. I'm just saying the poems that inherit the tripartite structure. We don't have to talk about Imam Busiri right now, but it's not necessarily equal. Yeah, it can be perhaps sometimes just 2 lines, or 2-3 lines. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the father. Yeah, Zuhair bin Abi Sulma. Yeah. So the narrations say that some say he went in disguise. Some say that the Prophet ﷺ didn't know his description, didn't know how he looked like. The, no, the answer only said that after he said, "Ana Ka'b bin Zuhair, I'm Ka'b bin Zuhair," and then he says, "Ya Rasulullah, da'ani wa adu Allahi adrib unuqa." Yeah. Yes, probably. Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, I don't recall anything about his father, Abi Sulma. But the narrations say Ka'b and Bujair, which is the brother. Yeah. Yeah. there's some, some tunes. I'm not a good singer, but like if you search Bennett Su'ad on YouTube, you'll see some Egyptian, like Kulthum and that generation of, they also have, they sing it in like a certain musical way also. Yeah, but it's not always read like min tadhakkuri jiran. It's not like the Burda. You don't have I haven't heard that even in gatherings or anything like that. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. The first one, I'm not sure whether it was solely. I mean, it was definitely practiced by the like majority of pre-Islamic Arabia, but geographically, I'm not entirely sure. Um, I know different tribes also sometimes had different variations. So like the Hudayli tribe, um, it has certain features that might be different from each other. A good book, and I think at the end, but I mean there are so many other books under further reading that I can kind of recommend if you want to look into early Arab poetry. There's a small book, it's probably this thin, by Michael Sells called Desert Tracings. It's a very nice book, and like he was at U Chicago, so he was one of, um, he was really gifted in terms of translation. So Desert Tracings, it's a very nice book that talks about this tripartite structure and the poems that he gives, and he gives the poem that he includes in his book. He'll explain the different variations. Another one is just a PDF online you can search called the Mu'allaqat for Millennials. So it was kind of like a project that was catered for the youth, trying to make Arab poetry a bit more accessible to a younger crowd. Yeah, Mu'allaqat for Millennials. Um, but the ilqa of the Shia, with the recitation of it, I'm not entirely sure like what the tune is. I would think it's more like how there's no tune that they wouldn't sing it. Probably just بانت سعاد فقلبي اليوم متبول. But whether it's a certain rhyme or certain melody, like I'm not entirely sure. But the concept of poetry is still very much alive in Arabia, because you would have, I mean, even in Egypt, um, you can search it up online. It's Amiya, which is colloquial. Sidi Ashraf probably knows a lot better than me in terms of colloquial, but you have colloquial Egyptian poems, and they kind of be like, freestyling. He'll say something, and someone else will say something, someone else will say. So it's very much common still, how you do it. Yeah, you can search it up online. Okay, so unless we need a longer break, we can probably just go with the praise. Okay. So the praise, right? Section 3, the madh or the madih. In other poems, it would be known as the fakhr. So he says, تسعى الوشاة جنابيها وقولهم إنك يا ابن أبي سلمى لمقتول. Right? So the slanders run at her flanks, and the word is, O son of Abi Sulma, you're a dead man. Right? And here, the Ka'b is actually putting Ibn Abi Sulma. So his father's name is Ibn Zuhair, but he says Ibn Abi Sulma, saying, I'm the son of my grandfather. Right? There's a narration of Muhammad that he says, Ana Ibn Abdul Muttalib. Right? That I'm the son of Abdul Muttalib, not Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because if Abu Sulma was a great man, then he's trying to say that I'm the son of so and so, right? I'm the grandson of so and so. So he goes, kind of skips one generation. Because, like I mentioned earlier, the Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma. So, and he says, إِنَّكَ لَمَقْتُولُ. So this phrase, the lam is lam al-tawkid. It gives a sense of, it stresses like you're really, really dead, right? So the lam there is giving emphasis on the sentence. So you can go to the next slide. And he says, أنبئت أن رسول الله أوعدني ولعفو عند رسول الله مأمول. He says, I've been told that the Prophet ﷺ has given me a threat, but nevertheless, hope from the Messenger of God ﷺ is what is hoped for. And he recites, this is the start of, line 4 of the Madh. And I think we can try and just ruminate on this part of the poem. So he says, لقد أقوم مقاما لو يقوم به أرى وأسمع ما لو يسمع الفيل لظل لظل يرعد إلا أن يكون له من الرسول بإذن الله تنويل حتى وضعت يميني لا أنازعه في كف ذي نقمات قيله القيل. He says, I have stood at this place where I'm standing right now, and I'm seeing what I'm seeing, I'm hearing what I'm hearing. And that even if an elephant were to hear it, what I'm seeing right now, standing in front of Prophet, that elephant would have trembled and, been so scared, out of fear of the Prophet, except if the Prophet gave it a sense of assurity or a sense of safety. Until I put my right hand, and I wouldn't have, hesitated, لَا أُنَازِعُهُ في كف ذي نقيمات قيله القيل. In the palm of someone who takes revenge, or people who have wronged him, and his word is the word, right? He says, قيله القيل. So, for a modern reader would be, will say, I'm scared, right? That scared me, or, will say it in certain ways. But for the Arabs, no, they would liken an environment to, for example, an elephant. So you have the story of Abraha, right? Where, the elephants, charging down to Mecca, trying to destroy the Kaaba. And this was how scared, this is the severity of Kaab's fear. I can go to the next one. And then he goes on, so this line, إِنَّ الرَّسُولَ لَسَيْفٌ يُسْتَضَاءُ بِهِ مُهَنَّدٌ مِّن سُيُوفِ اللَّهِ مَسْلُولُ. So verily, the Messenger ﷺ is a sword by which other people are illuminated or seek illumination by an Indian blade from the unsheathed swords of God. We can try and unpack this. The Arabs, when they wanted to welcome a person into their tribe, they would raise, in the night, they would raise their swords up in the air, and because their swords would reflect with the moonlight, that tribe will know where, its other tribe members are. So you think of it as like before they had light bulbs and stuff like that, you want to give, a sense of ishara, a sense of indication that I'm standing here. So the Arabs would raise their swords, and then it would reflect on the moonlight, and then, the other members would know where they are. So Ka'b is doing tashbih to the Prophet ﷺ that he's like this, that he is that sword by which if that sword were to go down, and you wouldn't be able to tell where you were. So it's really through him that we know where to orient ourselves to. Muhannadun, so at that time it's understood that the blade or the metal piece of the sword, its best one or the best version of it, sample of it, came from India, which is east. Not necessarily India as a nation state, that's how we understand it today, but the larger region. Even Malaysia later on would be considered Indian in everything east of the Arab lands. Min suyufillahi maslulu. Maslul means unsheathed, which is like taken out from its cover, because they would have a cover, and if you would take it out, the enemy would see it. In another riwayah of the poem, which it appears in different manuscripts and also different commentaries as well. Even Imam Bajuri in his short commentary also includes it. It says, "Inna Rasula la nurun yustada'u bihi." That very the Prophet ﷺ is a light by which other men seek illumination by. Rajan Munir, the Quran calls the Prophet ﷺ. So another line another rendition or another rendition of the another riwayah of the poem has the word nur instead of sayf. But you know, the larger imagery, the most general imagery is pretty much the same. Yeah. So this is the last part. After he does praise of the Prophet ﷺ, he does praise of the muhajirin, which is the emigrators, the people who emigrated from Mecca to Medina. In another riwayat here it says usbatun, in another riwayat it says futyatun, which is the jama' of fata, which is like a noble lad. So I'll recite في فتية من قريش قال قائلهم ببطن مكة لما أسلموا زالوا فما زال أنكاس ولا كشف عند اللقاء ولا ميل معزيل. Another band of Quraysh that said, depart, when they left Mecca. And they did, but no weakling departed, nor any of them who would be scared in battle, and they wouldn't sway unarmed. وَلَا مِيلٌ أَمْيَلٌ, or مَا لَا يَمِيلُ is to sway. It's basically saying that they're very brave men. Yes. This is another line. Some say that the reason why he praised the Muhajirin is because he was kind of hurt by the Ansar. When he accepted Islam, one of the Ansar said, leave me, right? Ya Rasulullah, da'ni wa aduwallahi adrib unuqa. He said, when one of the Ansar said, leave him to me, Prophet of God, let me strike off his neck, let me kill him. So because of that, he kind of felt slighted that the Ansar said that to him. In some narrations, they say that the Prophet ﷺ said, do praise of the Ansar, and he later wrote a poem about the Ansar. But we can talk about that another time. Can I just see what's after this? Okay. This part is really nice. It's, you know, it's very early Arab in the sense of they'll talk about their bravery and how they were warriors. Maybe just the one before it, just to see. Yeah. Okay, maybe we can go to the next one. Yeah. You know, it talks about how the Muhajirin, when they fight, that whenever they strike, they wouldn't strike, you know, their bodies, they would strike their necks, basically saying they were, you know, armed fighters, basically. And they were accurate with the way they fought. And it likens maut to, or it uses the idafa structure. They said, the watering pools of death. But we associate hawd, like the hawd of the Prophet ﷺ, with life, with, you know, vibrancy, nourishment. But here he's saying, no, the water pools of death. Death is likened to, you know, a sort of rest from the pains of this world. Next one. So what the poem became, that's the poem. We can open up to questions after this, but we can go to the next one, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's a long, long tradition. Another book, I think it's in the end, it's in the handout, is Suzanne Stetkovich's Mental Odes. She has her own theory of what these odes are, what these qasaid are, but she, you know, we have the Burda or Banat Su'ad of Ka'ab ibn Zuhair, and later on we have the Burda Imam Busiri, Kawakib al-Durriya, and later on 19th century we have Ahmad Shawqi, who writes Ala Nahj al-Burda, on the way of the Burda, so he writes his own poem. So praise of the Prophet ﷺ is very ancient in the sense that it started very early. It's, you know, it comes in different shapes, sizes, colors, tones, but they're all, you know, I think what I wanted to do today is kind of bring us back to a very, very early poem and see kind of how things started. I think there's one more thing I wanted to say. What's after this? Yeah, I think maybe just behind the one before. I think it'll come to me later. So that's Banat Su'ad in a nutshell, in about 50 minutes. So if anyone has questions or, you know, can kind of like open it up to a discussion or anything like that, however you guys want, we can do that as well. Yeah.
Barakallahu feekum.
Oh yeah.
Just you mentioned that you were going to come back to Tanwil.
Oh yeah. Okay.
لظل يرعد إلا أن يكون له من الرسول بإذن الله تنويل. So
Yes.
maybe you want to mention
Okay.
something about that?
At the end of his nasib, which is the lovesick part, he says, أرجو وآمل أن تدنو مودتها فما إخال لدينا منك تنويل. So he uses the same word at the start. That's there, tanwil. And then he uses it again for the Prophet ﷺ, granting safety. Imam Bajuri says tanwil بمعنى تأمين, which is safety. He uses the same word.
So does he achieve the tanweel from Su'ad?
No.
He wants the tanweel from Su'ad, the granting of that favor, but he doesn't get it.
He doesn't get it. Yeah.
He gets it from
Yes, basically. That's how one would understand it. So he even uses at the start where he says تجرى عوارض ذي ظلم إذا ابتسمت كأنه منهل بالراح معلول. Right? I mean, he talks about Su'ad's teeth and how it's kind of dripped with a little wine. He says كأنه منهل بالراح معلول. He says as if it's been dipped or it's been given this drink once and then twice again. So the Arabs would differentiate between anhala wa alla. So anhala is the first drink they would get when a camel come to a watering place. The first drink is nahl, and they'll go back somewhere else and graze, and then they'll come back, and then it'll be alla, I believe, not alla, which is the second drink. Ka'b uses that in his poem, but when he made fun of the Prophet ﷺ at the start, which I think I mentioned at the start, he said, سقاك بها المأمون كأسا روية فأنهلك المأمون منها وعلك. He uses the same words, نهل وعل. But that at that time was making fun of the Prophet ﷺ. But here he uses it again, he flips it, and he uses it when in praise of the Prophet ﷺ. So, you have a set number of vocabulary that he uses. I don't think it's the best way to think of it, but whenever I see different words or similar words being used in different contexts by the same poet, I kind of think of it as like a remix of like a song or something like that. You do something and then you kind of like reverse it, or put some different. I don't know anything of this field, but it's a sense of creativity or sina'at to share. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
You say that the first section, the nasib, is sort of like a representation of his Jahiliyah period or his Jahilul Hal. But if so, it says that Su'ad now dwells in a land that is not reachable except through this noble, well-bred, swift striding camel. So if Su'ad represents this Jahiliyah thing, but it says in this she camel that you still can reach Su'ad. So how does that?
Okay, so this is involved. Shaykh Hamza talks about Banat Su'ad, and he says, it means the Jahili time. I've heard other people also say it's the Jahili time, but I haven't really come across it in the commentary saying that it refers to the Jahili period. That said, it's a whole different tradition or different type of commentary to start saying things, okay, what does it actually mean metaphorically, right? Look, what does Su'ad mean? If it's, okay, the poem at its core refers to a person, but can we give a figurative meaning of what Su'ad is? Can we say Su'ad means something else? That's a whole different line of commentary. This is terrible of me, but that's something I want to look into for my graduate studies. There is I don't want to mention it here in a different audience, but there is a mystical commentary on Banat Su'ad, and in essence it says that Su'ad is felicity or sa'ada, happiness. Happiness is gone. But when he refers to Su'ad through the pronoun here, it means one's nafs. So he says, بانت سعاد فقلبي اليوم متبول متيم إثرها لم يفت مقبول. It's like saying felicity is gone. I'm never going to be happy again. It's, you know, it's some far off um, aim of mine that I'll never be able to obtain. And then he says, أكرم بها أكرم بها خلة لو أنها صدقت موعودها أو لو أن النصح مقبول لكنها خلة قد سيط من دمها فجر وإخلاف وتبديل. Now he says, oh, what a friend she would have been if she kept to her promise. But now he doesn't say Su'ad here, he says she. Now she's been basically tarnished or blemished with breaking promises and replacing me, and they say that refers to the soul. But that's a whole different tradition. No one says that's what it means. They're just saying maybe we can try and be creative and try and read it in a more ethical sense, you know, in a more tarbawi sense, where can we try and read a lesson out of it. So that's a whole different, yeah, like a whole different tradition. Yeah. Yeah. Some say that he wrote some lines at Abraq al-Azaf where he was waiting for, not Abraq al-Azaf, when Bujair said, come, you know, Bujair actually said, I should have mentioned this. Bujair actually tells him to come to the Prophet ﷺ and that the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't punish him. And when he learns of that, he starts going to his tribe and asking for safety and all sorts of things. And then when he realizes he has nowhere else to go, then he writes a few of the lines. And then when he gets to Medina, he writes more. But whether or not he wrote 10 or 15 or 20, then we don't really quite know. It's quite vague. Yeah. To write? I think it varies. I think it varies. I never poet to poet. I mean, you have the Arabs, they would differentiate. Actually, some say that Zuhair bin Abi Sulma was Abdu Shi'r, was a slave to poetry because he's great, everything, but they say that it didn't come as naturally as others. So some poets they found it harder to compose. So you have the Maqamat al-Hariri. This is a different type of Arabic literary text, but they say that he would go to a corner of a room and start like plucking his hair, and because he just couldn't compose. It just found it very hard for him to write. There's a certain like scientific word for it, but it differs from poet to poet. Some find it easier, some find it quite hard. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
My question is similar. From your research, do you incline to say that it was paired or was it impromptu? Or
I
was
don't
it
know.
combination
Yeah.
of both? Because at the closing, he mentioned about the Muhajirin, and then and then you said he was tried to parody the Ansar.
Yeah.
Right, so that probably that bit was a bit impromptu at that point in time.
Yeah.
But the beginning part probably it was a culmination of his reflection on the journey in
Probably.
Hijrah. Allah
Yeah,
Alam.
Allah Alam. It's hard to say. I mean, because even the story has so many different renditions, has so many different variations, so it's hard to say. Though, if you want to try and understand it in a more contemporary way, it's just not. If you met a Arab poet now, they can do wonders in just while sitting with you. They can just start. It's a sina'a, it's a craft, and they grow up with it, and some people can freestyle on the spot. And I've met people like that. I had a classmate who can just freestyle and rhyme and rap on the spot. And like for me, I just can't think of even making a sentence to. But it's a tradition. I mean, like it's a skill that maybe it's hard for us to kind of. How can they write a 100-line poem, 58-line poem in one sitting on the spot? But it's very much possible if one goes through the required training, and it's a gift. Yeah, some people are just gifted. They can just do it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You just start. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No, that's an important point. That's probably why they find it so easy. It's like a repertoire, basically. You just all sorts of things. Yeah. I mean, obviously they say that he decided to go to the Prophet ﷺ to make tawbah, and before that he had composed a few lines. And then when he met him and he had the opportunity to recite it, then he completed it. But when he became Muslim, I mean, we would think that he became Muslim in front of the Prophet ﷺ when he gave his hand and he said that, I want to become Muslim.
His state of mind,
Mm.
and he was, when he was becoming or inclined to become Muslim, there was a realization that the past felicity is not actually happiness.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, one could think that way. For example, this little small book, the editor just says that when he tries and tackles the question on whether Su'ad is real, he just says that through designating a name, Su'ad, he's able to express all the feelings that he's feeling at that moment, which is fear and sadness and regret, a sense of an overcoming of emotion. But like I said earlier, for the Arabs, they're not going to say, oh, I'm sad, or I'm happy, or I'm sorry. The way they think is just, I'm going to just write compose this poem, not write, but compose this poem. So it could be his state of mind, it's then again, I would say the literary critics who read all these works of poetry and judge whether this one is better than the other, the state of mind of the poet isn't really something that they take into consideration, because it's something quite new to us. How did he feel at that moment, when writing poetry? For them, it's just, he wrote this, it's eloquent, it's a masterpiece, and we accept it as how it is. But they don't really entertain, what was he feeling at that point? And, obviously the story defines and gives a background to the poem, but, they don't really quite entertain.
Surely something would inspire
Right, yeah.
to write
Exactly. That's what they say, they just stop it, yeah.
based on whatever experience.
Exactly, yeah. But whether, I just haven't seen it written yet, because they kind of take it as like this is a convention that the Arabs had. They would write this way. But definitely, undeniably, that's it reflects something of his person and his life.
Also, this poem was first,
Yes, I believe so. In Medina.
is it written in the Prophet's mosque now?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. It was also narrated. The reason why there's so many variations and renditions of it is because it was transmitted orally. So the writing of the poem probably came much later, when they began to make these diwan or dawawin, which are compilations of poetry, and then they would compile it. No, probably not. Very unlikely. Even the writing of the Quran also came much later after Prophet ﷺ passed away. Yeah.
Suppose one is inspired to write an ode to the Prophet, for the Prophet. Would this be a good example, a format to follow, in the sense that you're bringing your sort of jahiliyah past or face, or bringing, how to say,
Your inheritance or something.
but sort of filth,
Right.
so is that the proper adab, or it's okay, as long as your intentions are good, and you wanna sort of
So
interact with the Prophet.
the question of the nasib is very very touchy, if I could say. So the book that I mentioned earlier, Mustafa Sadiq al-Rafi'i's Tarikh al-Adab al-Arabi, he talks about this. They say that Sayyidina Umar, after Prophet ﷺ has passed away, later on in his Khilafah, he says no one can write nasib anymore because it corrupts the minds, and but the nasib still trickles down in Islamic history, because even أمن تذكر جيران بذي سلمي من سجتدم عن جرام مقتة بدمي. هبت الريح من تلقاء كاظمة وأومض البرق في الظلماء من إضمي is still a type of nasib. The starting of the burda, is it from the flashes of lightning, and is it from the blowing of the winds and the neighbors that you had at a certain place? It's still a nasib, even though it's not talking about a specific person. So love sickness, as you know, the way one would start a poem, still trickles down later on in Arab Islamic history. But the way is probably very different. I would say the other Jahili nasibs can be very wild in their poems, and we don't have that anymore. And it dies out, and it becomes more, and like more sharaf, like this, more appropriate for the Muslim audience. But they're different theories. Like him as a Mustafa Sadiq al-Rafi'i, his theory I think is quite compelling. That the nasib dies out, but it takes a different form. So like the nasib here, it's fairly respectful and it's not that wild basically. It gives certain descriptions, but the bulk is about the she camel, and that's the rahil. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I too much talking. You do.
Thank you so much, Sidi Dani, for the explanation of the poem. May we benefit and may we be inspired by this. And with that, I would like to invite Sidi Dani to close with a closing dua, please. For us. There's a lot.
Okay.
Closing.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم يسر كل عسير يسر علينا كل عسير فتيسير العسير عليك يسير اللهم يا من لا يحتاج إلى البيان والتفسير حاجاتنا كثير وأنت عالم بها وخبير ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you, Sayyid Aman.